Welcome to the 1905 podcast. Joe and I have been going to Stamford Bridge for over 30 years. For the past 3 years, we've been exchanging voice notes on everything from the highs in Porto to the lows of Potter. Each week, this podcast will take you inside our unfiltered thoughts on all things Chelsea, sharing our view from Gate 13 of the Matthew Harding stand. Let's hit the notes. This week, we're talking Enzo Maresca, and one big reason Chelsea fans will love him. We have the Leicester City perspective from social media star Henry Rowley, and we're talking about the futures of Trevoh Chalobah and Reece James. Let's start with a voice note that Joe sent me on the day that Enzo Maresca was announced as Chelsea's new head coach.
Hi mate, just thought I'd drop you a message about the signing Maresca. I think I'm feeling pretty positive about it. He has obviously shown to the ownership that he's incredibly diligent. He knows his stuff. He's got a way of playing, a style that suits them and their ideas. There's going to be no fluff with him, I don't think, from his press conferences with Leicester and the football that I've seen with Leicester play last season. He's always come across very, very well. There's always that kind of thing in the back of your mind that he's never managed in the Premier League. And that is a stick you can beat him with. But I think overall his record speaks for itself. The fact he's been with Pep in their treble-winning season, he's seen the ups and the downs. He's been around that winning mentality. And I just can't see how... Not that he won't fail, but I feel as though he'll do everything in his power to make sure that our club is a success. We've been on the fringes of something. I think with Pochettino, we had that, a good end to the season, a good 2 or 3 months, depending on how you look at it, what you deem a success. Obviously, we all know as Chelsea fans that finishing 6th and getting beat in a cup final is not necessarily success, and none of us think that. But you have to sort of start again somewhere, and I think Pochettino has given us that sort of springboard to begin green shoots again. We've had this period of pretty negative fan reaction, but for me, he did very well. Given the circumstances, an awful lot of players that came and went, and that's a difficult thing to do. So I think he navigated that pretty well. I think Maresca comes into this situation where those players have now had at least a full season playing. The likes of Casado's had a second season in the Premier League, and you could see towards the end of the season how much he improved from the beginning. Players like Enzo Fernandez, he needs to bring the best out of him. There's no doubt about that. I think you don't invest £100 million in a player and hope that, you're looking to sell that player on in a year or two. He's going to be there for the duration. So they're going to need to start getting a tune out of him. I think overall, the supporters generally have to get behind the idea that this is a different approach. Roman would come in, wield the axe, and before you knew it, you had 5 or 6 new players into the team or squad. And then you've also got 5 or 6 players that were under the previous manager who are now disgruntled, upset, don't know where their future lies, end up kicking around the club for ages. And we as fans, we sit there and we say, well, why is he not playing? Or why is he not doing this? It's because he's completely out of the manager's plans. I think now, at least with the way they're running it, for right or for wrong, players like Mudryk, players like Casado, Cucurella, whoever you want to say, there's always going to be, whilst they're in that team, there's always going to be a place for them. Now, again, players will be bought and sold. There's no two ways about it. But they're building a squad that if we do end up sacking a manager in the future, there's not going to be massive upheaval, because the sporting directors and the owners are kind of going down this approach of stability, believe it or not. I mean, I know it sounds mad when you've sacked a manager after one season, but if he wasn't the guy they wanted for the future, Pochettino, it'd be good to change it now and put in a guy that they've actually been watching, been monitoring, and let's just see. Let's hope that he can provide some positive results at the beginning and get the crowd behind him, because I think that's what we need at the very beginning. Is a good start, get things on, get things rolling, and I think that'll buy him a bit of time, particularly at the beginning. So we'll see what happens, but I think overall I'm pretty positive about the appointment.
Hello, mate. So Maresca, here we go. One thing that I read earlier, which I was really positive about, and I know there's so much we can talk about, and we will, about Maresca, but one thing was this really good article in The Athletic with a Leicester fan talking about how he's connected with the fans. And one thing that I think has been lacking for a little while now, I think with Potter it was never a moment for it to happen, and I think under Pochettino, I think it could have done. I think he was very conscious we needed to win something. So I think if we'd won the League Cup, things might have been different. That might have been a bit of a turning point for us, and God, we should have done. But we've not really had a proper connection with the fans and the manager since Tuchel, and obviously under Frank, it was amazing in the first spell. And the one thing that I think has really annoyed match-going fans in the last couple of years has been the lack of the manager and the players coming over to the fans, particularly at away games. I think you kind of have the usual suspects of Gallagher would be pretty good, Chalobah and Thiago Silva. Ironically, three names that, let's be honest, could all be leaving this summer. And one of the things that came out in this article is that actually Maresca is really good at that. He'd always make a point himself of going over to the singing section of the Leicester fans and making sure that all of the players went to. And I know it sounds small and on the face of it insignificant, but I think particularly if he can get a good start going, things like that can really build momentum for him and really build momentum around kind of what is a very young group. You know, the classic moment, didn't you, under Klopp? Do you remember when they drew with West Brom in that game in his first season? Was it 2-2 or something? And then he got all of the players to go over in front of the Kop and do that thing that he does, which at the time was mocked, kind of understandably after a draw with West Brom, but actually set the start of what they did for the years to come. And I'm not saying he's going to obviously go that far, but I think at Chelsea things like that are important to us and important to the fans. Again, being Italian, we've had such an amazing connection with Italian players and managers over the years. You know, back in arguably still my favourite era of Di Matteo, Vialli, Zola. Obviously, we've had incredible managers like Ancelotti and Di Matteo winning the Champions League, and I'm excited to see what Maresca does in that respect. I think it could really help him. Outside of that, it'd be interesting. I'm excited by what I've read about him in terms of tactically. I think that a lot of what he does feels like it will suit our squad really well on paper, which is exciting. I'll talk more about some of the stuff that I think he could do with certain players in other voice notes, but I think there's a lot to be excited about. The thing to be concerned about is the other side, isn't it? A lot of Leicester fans, I spoke to Henry the other day, as a big Leicester fan, about his perspective, and he was kind of a bit mixed on him. So there is a concern there, and obviously the other concern is experience, but that seems to be the name of the game, doesn't it, at the moment? Inexperienced managers are in vogue. And he does have a year's more experience than Arteta did when he took over at Arsenal. So we'll see. But yeah, speak to you later.
I was at work earlier and I was listening to a couple of podcasts about Chelsea and this, that and the other, and opinions on Maresca and opinions on Pochettino and that sort of thing. I think people are sort of slightly missing the point a little bit. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Maresca is going to win us the league, Maresca is going to win the cup, and he's going to get us into the Champions League. I'm not going to say anything about that. All I'm going to say is from an owner's point of view. Now, I'm not pro or against the owners. I'm a bit in the middle somewhere at the moment. I think they need to be given a little bit of time, and they can only really be judged in a couple of years when players have got older and players have developed. Then you'll see potentially Chelsea back on the rise, or if they fall down the league, then clearly something's gone drastically wrong. But I think the hiring of Pochettino initially should have rung alarm bells all over the place. To to get a 2-year deal, I think all Chelsea fans felt as though this was going to be a short-term thing anyway. It never struck me as someone that was just going to be at the club for the next 6 years. I think we had a conversation at least a year ago that sort of suggested that he'd be someone that might bring some good football back to the club, hopefully play with a front foot mentality, stop passing the ball backwards to the goalkeeper and back to the centre-backs all the time, which we'd seen under Potter and other managers too, and kind of just get the club back up to where it needed to be. Now, finishing 6th is not what we want to be. I appreciate that. But I just think that in American football, and I follow that quite religiously now, the quarterback is the most important position. Now, if you've got a good quarterback, which you drafted in the first round the year before or the year before that, the coaches and the teams quickly see what that guy has. Does he have the skills? Does he have the mentality to get you to a Super Bowl? That's what they're aiming for. Now, I'm not saying Maresca is going to win us anything in the short term, or just generally be, a fantastic manager. I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball. I'm not going to predict anything. But if Chelsea feel as though Pochettino is not the guy that's going to get them into the Champions League, or he's only going to get them 4th next season, the way they see it, that's not good enough. Now, for better, for worse, if they think Maresca has got a better chance of playing the football they want to see and a better chance of finishing in Europe or finishing 3rd or 2nd than Pochettino, then you take that chance. In American football, a team will gladly draft another quarterback the year after they drafted one the year before, purely because they don't think they can win with that guy. And the ultimate thing is winning. It doesn't matter what we think. Play good football, pass side to side, go counter-attack, whatever you want. But winning is what you want to do. And we're not going to, we're not daft enough to think that we're going to sit here and suddenly play Man City off the park and win the league next season. I don't think anyone thinks that. But you need to put yourself in a position on a long-term strategy that might be the case. And I know Chelsea sack managers. I'm not silly. I'm well aware of that. They haven't been given very long. But I do believe they came with this mantra that they want to have a stable manager. I just don't think they found the right one yet. So for me, the Maresca thing is a case of, if you don't believe Pochettino was going to get you any more than you got this season, finishing 5th or 4th, they might not think that's good enough. And maybe they felt as though that's as far as Pochettino would have taken them. And did they want to extend his contract by another year and then go into the Club World Cup in June next year? I don't think so. I think the appointment, again, I'm not saying he's going to do anything good or bad, but I think we just need to give it a little bit of time, let it rest. Let's see what he does in pre-season. Let's see what he does with regards to buying players and shipping players out, or certainly the club buying and shipping players out. And we may see a different style of football next season, and it might be something we all can get on board with. And if we can see signs of real development, so I think Poch has developed us this year quite a bit at times, but I think I'm not losing too much sleep over Pochettino because I don't think he really got on board with the fans. So as much as he did well, I think I'm quite looking forward to seeing what Maresca's got.
Hello, mate. I'm currently dying from hay fever. It's horrendous. But, yeah, Enzo Maresca. I mean, look, I think let's look at the positives from a Chelsea point of view first. So for you guys, he's bold, right? I think that's the strongest. That's the best bit about Maresca at the moment. You look at Pep, bold. Ten Hag, he's won a trophy, bold. Arne Slot coming into Liverpool, bold. at this point, if you don't have a bold manager, you just can't keep up with the competition. So I think Arteta either needs to shave his head or get to fuck. No, as a Leicester fan, I think what I think with Maresca is he is a good manager. He comes from that sort of Pep world. He's one of Pep's proteges. So he obviously knows his football. And what he did very effectively at Leicester was he got us playing his style of football very quickly. And it was a complete transformation, and we got the results, so it worked. But I think, we spoke about this, that the Leicester fans are very split with Maresca, because for me personally, what I saw last season was the reason we won the league was because we had the best squad and nothing much more than that. In every kind of game, we were never that convincing. We were sort of grinding out 1-0s, 2-1s. But I think that was just because the quality of the players were coming through, whereas the actual structure and style of play that we were doing wasn't quite clicking. And that's why halfway through the season, we had this 17-point lead, and suddenly all the other teams actually figured out how to play against us and started catching up. At the end, again, I think the quality came through. The experience of the players on the team sort of prevailed. But I think for a lot of fans, at no point throughout the season were we convincing of okay, wow, this is a really good style of football. We look really solid. We look unplayable. Because we didn't, we didn't really dominate games. We didn't look resounding. We didn't seem to have that killer instinct. And so with Maresca, it didn't work at Leicester, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work at Chelsea. I wouldn't put it down to him, say, being a bad manager, for example, because I've not seen enough of him. I personally think it didn't quite click at Leicester, which is probably a controversial thing to say. Sorry about the wind. Considering that we won the league, 97 points, and got promotion to the Premier League. But I think there's a lot of Leicester fans who aren't devastated that he's gone, because it's almost like now we're in the Prem, rebuilding with a Premier League focus and a new style of play of what's going to help us readapt to that is probably more of a positive. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting, what he did at Leicester when we've just come down, players from all different places. We lost a few players, some key players. So it was a kind of fresh new structure of a team, and he got them playing together and playing his style very quickly, which I kind of think is what Chelsea need. That's what your problem was last season. Pochettino's a quality manager, there's absolutely no doubt about that. But it just didn't quite fit with the position Chelsea's in, You guys have spent all of that blood money on players who have quality, but they just haven't been gelling. This is what happens when you send a voice note in London. So yeah, I think Maresca could be good for Chelsea. If I had to bet on it, I would say he won't last too long, which is probably a more cynical point of view, but I don't know if he's got the experience, and to take on as many big players as Chelsea have and as big a club as Chelsea is, it's a lot to ask. So that is my take.
So we were talking about transfers the other day, and I know it's exciting to bring in a Osimhen or someone like that, but I think the outgoings are going to be just as important as the incomings. You look at the guy from Fulham that's just been signed, Tosin. He's a free transfer, and Chalobah's on the block potentially for 35, 45 million pounds. Now, if you can sell a player like Chalobah for that money and keep a player like Gallagher, I think it's a win-win situation. I think when everybody's fit, Chalobah doesn't play centre-back. Now, some will agree, some will disagree with that, but I think you've got the likes of Colwill and Fofana when fit. And I think they probably will go into the market and potentially buy another one. So Tosin is essentially going to be a third, fourth backup. Now, he's a free transfer. You rake in 30 to 40 million for Chalobah. And yes, you're selling your academy product. I get that. But I think if you can keep a player like Gallagher, I think is actually far more important in the position he plays. I think they can only be good for the club. The American owners aren't going to be like Roman. They won't keep everybody because they can't keep everybody. Yes, they spent, as we all know, probably way too much on certain players and overspent here and overspent there. But I think they are finding their feet. I think there is an element of giving them a chance, because otherwise, we're all going to get nowhere. Fighting between ourselves about why we sold him, why we bought him. They're looking at it from a business point of view. This is no longer a Roman, we'll buy anyone we want, we'll sell anyone we want on a whim. They are quite methodical in what they're doing. Now, some people don't trust Winstanley and Stewart. The jury's maybe a little bit out, but I think some of their signings are starting to become quite important and quite clever. Now, we've all got our favourites. There's people that hate Gallagher. I think the match-going fan sees everything that he is. He's tenacious, he's hard-working, he's good on the ball. Yes, he needs to add some goals to his game and things like that, but I think he's a far greater asset to have than Chalobah. Now, no one wants to see the academy products sold, but it's inevitable. It's going to happen. I think we all need to get used to that a little bit, because they're going to make some good money on him if he does leave. And also, there's no guarantee that Gallagher stays either. If his contract is up next season, if he's not willing to sign one or we're not willing to give him one, then obviously he'll leave. But I think let's wait this out. Let's see what happens, because obviously we're going to get money for Lewis Hall and potentially going to get money for Kepa and Lukaku coming through. We may not be in a position where it's actually that bad. And I think Mason Mount as well. I think that money comes out this season too. So I think PSR is pretty much covered for the time being. But PSR chat is not obviously the most riveting thing in the world, but I think it's something we all have to sort of get used to a little bit too. I think there's definitely a suck it and see approach. We have to give something a go. All the chopping and changing is good for nobody. Now, Winstanley and Stewart, again, I know aren't everybody's flavour of the month and not everyone's cup of tea, but they are there to stay. Now, this manager is very important to them, because if this manager goes really pear-shaped quickly, then they'll come under more scrutiny. But I think if they can just get in a couple of players they feel they need in key positions, and if that means selling a Trev to get the player you want, then I'm kind of all right with that. It's not a great situation, and obviously if he does end up leaving, we wish him all the best. If he stays, again, brilliant. He's a great player to have around, but I think having good squad players around is not the same as having good first-team players, and that would be a very risky thing to do, is to keep someone where you can get 35 to 40 million pounds from now, opposed to keeping them on the bench for another season and then their value diminishes to maybe 15 or 20 million next season. So he's had a really good end to the year. For me, he probably could be in the England squad quite comfortably in that position, because I don't think anyone else is that great. But let's see what happens. But pleased with the signing of Tosin. He seems a good player. I've heard bits and pieces about him, not seen lots of him, but I know he's very quick, he's very big, he's mobile, occasional kind of error prone. So that's something we might need to look at, but let's give him a chance and let's see where it goes.
So I'm sure we'll end up talking about loads of players through the summer in the squad and kind of how they'll fit under Maresca and all that kind of stuff. But one player I really want to talk about is Reece. It just feels like it's a massive, massive season for him. Last season was obviously basically a write-off with injuries, but the season before was pretty much the same. I had a look earlier and he played 10 Premier League games last season and 16 the year before. So he's basically had 2 years pretty much out of the team, out the squad. And obviously Chilwell's been the same, but for Reece being made captain last season, it felt such a big moment for him. Obviously there was some really nice stuff that came out of the club, all those interviews and those kind of things. He signed his big new contract as well, didn't he? But it basically was a non-starter. And I actually, from more I read about how Maresca uses the fullbacks, I think it could be a very different story for Chilwell, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But for Reece, it could be perfect. He basically uses the fullbacks in two ways. A lot of people have seen this, but one of them basically drops in to be a right-sided or a left-sided centre-back. So they basically become a back three, which I really like Reece James as, actually. I know there was a lot of people didn't like when Tuchel used to play him there, and they preferred, and they then eventually became Aspilicueta, but they used to kind of rotate a little bit, didn't they? But actually, I really like him there. He's so strong. He's so good on the ball. He can bring in, when he does bring the ball forward, he can play in those kind of earlier crosses from the slightly different angle. And he's obviously so strong there that I think it works. But the other role is obviously even more interesting for him, which is the other fullback becomes an inverted centre midfielder. So they effectively drop in it alongside the deepest line midfielder to make a two. And wow, how perfect could Reece James be for that? Like, obviously, did it at Huddersfield really, really well. I think he got Player of the Year and was made captain that season. So he was brilliant for them there. It's always been like the pub talk before the game. I remember talking to Smudge about it like many times. Smudge was a big fan of the idea of like, oh, you could put, Reece James in the middle when we were looking at centre midfielders before and getting frustrated with Jorginho not being strong enough and stuff. And it always felt like a bit of a, yeah, but that'll never happen. But with this shape, it just naturally happens. So he drops in to right back when we're in defensive shape, but as soon as we get the ball, he drops into centre midfield. And yeah, I think that would be really exciting, actually, because you think of his passing ability, his shooting from range, what it'd give him. I mean, a lot of people are rightly concerned that it means that you don't get his crosses, and that is a big loss. But you suddenly get a bit of a goal threat from outside the box, which we've not had in a long time from centre midfield. Like, when was the last centre midfielder we really had who had a shot on him? I mean, you kind of, Oscar, I guess. I mean, he's more of a really attacking midfielder, isn't he? A proper centre midfielder. You're almost going back to Lampard era, unless I'm forgetting someone. So I think that's really interesting. It could be really good for him. And the final thing I wanted to say is, either role, whether he is right to centre back or it becomes like that moves into that centre midfield position, I feel like it's going to be so much better for his body. He's had all these injuries, as we said, over the last couple of years, and it's a very different strain on the body, kind of making those lung-busting, wing-back type runs up and down the pitch, 60-yard sprints, all that kind of stuff, get yourself back, to actually being much more about kind of smaller distances, but much less strain on the body, I think. So it could be a double win for him, because I think it could really play to some of the strengths he's got. And equally, hopefully, with the surgery he's had as well, finally get over those injury problems. So I'm really excited by that. It feels like, as I said, it feels like a really big season for him, because he's kind of become a bit of a forgotten man, hasn't he? I think people forget just how good he is. And you said it after the Forest game when he came on, put that ridiculous cross in and just looked absolutely world class for sort of 15 minutes. You rightly said, you were like, you see, that's what people are forgetting. Like, he is a level above. He is arguably the best player at the club. And I think in either of those two roles, he becomes even more central to what we do. So that's exciting. I wanted to share that. So I've had an idea of how we could finish each episode. It's really simple, but I think it'd be quite fun to end with a question that we answer each week. And I'm going to put this question to you to start with. And I'm really interested to hear what you say, actually. So I want to hear what your first ever Chelsea game was, your worst game, and your best game. So your first, worst, and best ever Chelsea games. Over to you.
I think if I start with my first Chelsea game, that was in 1989. It was a Division 2 Championship decider between Leeds and Chelsea. Now, even though I don't remember much of the game, I do remember going down the Fulham Road. We lived not far from there, so we were quite lucky. But my dad bought me a pin badge, and that became a regular occurrence. Every Chelsea game we went to, I'd get a new pin badge, and it kind of became a bit of a unique thing. When we turned up to the turnstile, there was no paying on my part. My dad would just kick me out of the turnstile. I'd roll underneath and my dad would pay for one. And that seemed to be the case for anybody who was travelling with the children on the day. Chelsea clinched the Division 2 title that day with a John Bumstead volley, if I remember rightly. And it was just quite a spectacular reaction. You know, everybody was so joyful and cheerful that we'd gone back up to Division 1. No Premier League back then, of course. And yes, I just remember it being a really wonderful time. I'd say my worst Chelsea game, I racked my brain over this because I was thinking, which one would I choose? And then it basically came to me, the infamous Iniesta volley in the Champions League, which sent us crashing out. I've never felt so annoyed and so almost disrespected in a game of football. The amount of we played well on the day, but the amount of chances we had through penalty shouts and all that, and just remembering how much better we were than them. And then Iniesta doing that wonderful volley at the end, which was a brilliant goal. There's no getting away from it. It was, how did that game make me feel? And I just didn't speak. I remember, I didn't go to this game, but I remember basically shouting and swearing and kicking the telly and, you know, all that sort of stuff. That sheer aggression, this injustice that we should have gone through. And then when that died down, it was just complete silence. I didn't speak for hours after the game. I went to bed. I barely slept. I woke up the next day, and I don't think I spoke again really until, you know, the early evening. I just could not get that out of my brain. It was such a, I think because we were going against Barcelona head-to-head quite a bit at the time, it just felt as though we would never kind of get past them. They just felt this real sense of injustice. So I think that's definitely my worst Chelsea game. And once again, for my best Chelsea game, this was one I really had to think about, and it would have been obvious to say certain games, but I think for me, there was just one that stood out because I just remember it so well. I watched the game on my own, and it was in January 1997. We played Liverpool at home in the FA Cup. We were dreadful in the first half. We were utterly dreadful. From memory, I think Rude was the manager, and we were gross. We really were poor. 2-0 down at half-time. I think Collymore, and I want to say Fowler scored the goals. And we just had no answer to them. They dominated us, they battered us, they made us quite childish at times. And I always remember thinking, I can't even bother to watch the second half. But I left it on, and I think Mark Hughes came on at half-time. It was him or Vialli, but I think it was Hughes. And Hughes scoring almost immediately after half-time, and the whole game changed. It was like the Harlem Globetrotters. We were just sensational. It's probably one of the best 45 minutes of football I've seen Chelsea play. To win that game 4-2 against it wasn't the best Liverpool team in the world, but they were still a big outfit. You know, to beat Liverpool any time is always a big result. So the comeback there was just fantastic. And I just remember thinking, we could beat anybody. It had that feel about it. If we can beat Liverpool 4-2 like this, I remember the pitch being quite icy white. Back then in 97, 98, the pitch always seemed, when it was cold, there was no underfloor heating, or if there was, they didn't use it. And so the games always had that kind of white slick to it. And there were just those little details that kind of made everything so, well, more special in a way. I quite like the old pitches when they had the goal mails weren't perfect and the corner flags weren't perfect. It sort of gave a rusticness to it. But you don't see that nowadays. Everything's just so prim and proper. But I think for me, that's my favourite game because it was just such a fantastic comeback against the top team.
Those were the Chelsea notes for this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, do us a favour and share it with a fellow Blue. And we'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review wherever you're listening. Wherever you may be, stay carefree, and remember, Every little thing's gonna be all right.